Hi, I'm the narrator, and today we're going to dive into one of America's most intense true crime cases, where Satanic Panic has not only shaken up the town of West Memphis, but also thrown justice off course. If you think criminal cases are just dry numbers and boring testimony, then congratulations. In West Memphis, it's a psychological game with unbelievable twists, unpredictable plot twists, and heart-stopping shocks. And to set the hook right from the start, picture this. You're standing in court. Three young men, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly Jr., are accused of murdering three innocent children, but the evidence is completely contradictory. The atmosphere was tense. The eyes from the audience seemed to penetrate the soul. The prosecutor squinted, the defense attorney clutched the file, and Jesse, the 16-year-old boy, could only look around with a face that was both scared and bewildered. The narrator joked, "If this were a TV show, you would have just stepped into the highest-rated pilot episode in history. But unfortunately, this is real life, and the consequences are extremely serious." The case began on May 5, 1993, when three children, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were found dead in the dark, heavily wooded area, their clothes torn, their bodies showing signs of violence. Immediately, public opinion was in an uproar. The small town of West Memphis fell into panic. Not long after, Damian, Jason, and Jesse, teenagers with unusual hobbies and lifestyles, became the prime suspects. The narrator chimes in, "If you think your style of dress, your music, or your love of mystery novels are harmless, in West Memphis, they turn you into a bad guy overnight." The climax begins with the interrogation of Jesse Miskelly Jr., a 16-year-old with a moderate IQ, who is interrogated by the police for hours. Jesse tells a convoluted, somewhat imaginary story, interspersed with fabricated details that he thinks are necessary to please the police. This one false statement creates a storm. Damian and Jason, who have nothing to do with each other, are dragged into a vicious spiral. The narrator interjects a playful joke. If this were a video game, Jesse would have just pressed the game over button, and his two friends would be dragged into the hardest level. The case becomes even more tense when prosecutors build their entire case on Jesse's testimony, claiming that the three young men were performing a satanic ritual and murdering children. The Satanic Panic, a religious and superstitious panic, is sweeping across America, casting doubt on all evidence and all unusual behavior. The narrator chimes in, "If you've ever heard of the Satanic Panic, this is proof. When fear and sensational media combine, anyone can become a monster, just by being a little different." The case is further complicated by inexperienced investigators, conflicting physical evidence, and errors in evidence collection, creating a chain of chaos that would make any lawyer's hair stand on end. Damian, Jason, and Jesse remain remarkably calm, but the pressure from the public, the courts, and the media nearly wears them down. Narrator interjects, "If you think the pressure of the court is stressful, then imagine being 16 to 18 years old, standing in the middle of an angry town, with all eyes on you to see if you deserve to die. Stress level equals 1010. And so, West Memphis 3, Flawed investigation begins. We will delve into every detail of the investigation, every misunderstood piece of evidence, every distorted testimony, to discover the truth behind the town-wide panic." Narrator interjects, "If you think crime is something that is easy to see, then here, the real crime is paranoia and errors in the investigation." Starting with the event of Jesse being interrogated incorrectly, we follow the group of investigators, police, and prosecutors. Jesse is brought into a dark, dimly lit interrogation room, causing him to almost panic. The narrator interjects with a playful tone, "If you thought the interrogation room was like CSI, you're wrong. It's like a nightmare TV version, cold, dark, and your psyche is being eroded by the second." While Jesse is stressed, Damian and Jason are under constant police surveillance, and evidence is hastily collected. From traces on the victims' bodies, hair, blood, to objects in the woods, all are recorded, but many details are mistaken, overlooked, or collected incorrectly. The narrator interjects. If this was a game of hide and seek, the police just accidentally hid the wrong item, and the whole game went haywire. Jesse tells imaginary details to please the police, which makes Damien and Jason prime suspects. Prosecutors rely on the testimony of this statement was used to make the accusation, completely ignoring the actual physical evidence. The narrator interjects. If you ever play the take someone's word for a game, remember that in West Memphis, that game can land you in prison for life. Meanwhile, rumors, sensational news, and distorted media spread, putting social pressure on the three teenagers. The defense attorneys had to work hard to explain every detail, from Jesse's false testimony to the lack of concrete evidence proving the crime. The narrator interjects. If you think lawyers just sit around drinking coffee and reading files, imagine them struggling with a maze of confusion created by national paranoia. Next, forensic scientists began re-examining the samples, fingerprints, DNA, and hair samples collected from the scene. The results showed no evidence of Damien or Jason, and Jesse's testimony was completely unreliable. The narrator chimed in. If you ever wanted to see science triumph over superstition, this is the moment you'll jump for joy. After weeks of intense work, the lawyers began to build their arguments against the entire Satanic Panic accusation. Damien and Jason presented their evidence, diaries, witnesses, schedules. Jessie gradually regained her composure, explaining that her previous testimony was the result of psychological pressure. The narrator chimed in. If this were a TV show, this would be the climax, the audience sitting on the edge of their seats, eyes wide and mouths agape. But unfortunately, in real life, there are no commercial breaks. Chapter 1 ends with a clear contradiction between physical evidence and the suspect's testimony, raising the question, can justice be served in an environment dominated by superstition, panic, and sensationalist media? The narrator chimes in. If you think the truth always wins in West Memphis, so we leave the dark interrogation room where 16-year-old Jesse Miskelly Jr. has been spouting off a series of incoherent, imaginative, and, frankly, sometimes hilarious statements that have left both his friends Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin reeling. But if you think that's where it ends, sorry, West Memphis has never been run on an easy as pie basis. We enter a media storm where every word, every glance, every step of the three teenagers is so exaggerated. It makes you wonder, am I reading a newspaper or watching a horror movie? First, imagine the headlines everywhere. 3 teens killed children in satanic ritual, or student rebel or monster. Journalists jostle, interview people, film Damien as he goes to school, Jason goes shopping, and Jessie just hides in her room. The narrator chimes in. If you thought the media was just reporting in West Memphis, the media is cooking the news, seasoning it with panic, and sprinkling it with drama to sell the goods. And at this point, psychologists and criminologists are called in to analyze the 3 teenagers based on their dressing style, interests, and unusual behaviors. Damien loves to read about the occult. Jason is into rock music. Jesse is a bit awkward and shy, enough to make them ideal suspects in the eyes of the public. The narrator chimes in. If you thought being a little different was normal, in West Memphis, being different equals being suspected of being a monster and being put on a waiting list for a quick trip to heaven or hell. Meanwhile, the police and prosecutors begin to draw up the entire crime map based on Jesse's testimony. What's more, many of the details Jesse gives completely contradict the physical evidence. The bloodstains didn't match. The marks on the victims' bodies didn't match the descriptions, but prosecutors still decided to tie everything together into a single argument. Damien, Jason, and Jesse had murdered 3 children in a satanic ritual. The narrator chimes in. If this were a jigsaw puzzle, the police would have just tried to fit the circle into the square. The result? An explosion. The defense attorneys immediately set about rescuing 3 young people from the maze of satanic panic. They sought out credible witnesses, scientific literature, alibi records, and gradually rebutted all the allegations. Damien had evidence of attending school and participating in extracurricular activities at the time of the crime. Jason had evidence at a friend's house, and Jesse, after some careful explanation, suggested that her previous statement was due to stress, fatigue, and police manipulation. The narrator interjects. If this were an escape room game, the lawyer would be the one holding the map, showing the three teenagers how to escape the maze full of traps. But the storm has not stopped. The media did not miss the opportunity. They created dramatization videos, added suspenseful background music, and dubbed in high and low tones, making the audience almost believe that Damien, Jason, and Jesse were real monsters. The narrator interjects. If you think TV is real, then here, TV has just added spice and given us a time bomb of panic. During this process, forensic experts were called back for further analysis. Hair samples, fingerprints, blood stains. The results were quite interesting. There was no sign of the three teenagers. But the prosecutors still clung to Jesse's testimony, considering it the most important evidence. The narrator interjects. If this were a folk game, Jesse would have just thrown the red ball into the net, and the opposing team would have thought it was a goal. Only it had nothing to do with the game. Meanwhile, the lives of the three young men and their families are turned upside down. Damien is isolated. Jason faces hostile stares from his friends. Jesse has frequent nightmares. The narrator interjects. If you think social pressure is normal, imagine. You're 16 to 18 years old. The whole town and the media are following your every move, and your every move is labeled a murderer. Stress level? Over 9,000. Notably, the prosecutors are relying on a series of assumptions. Different suspects and lifestyle equals satanic ritual equals crime. Even small details like clothes, hairstyle, musical preferences are turned into evidence. If you think clothes are just for wearing, the narrator chimes in. In West Memphis, clothes can cost you your freedom. Meanwhile, digital forensics and behavioral analysts begin to work through files, logs, maps, and other unnoticed data. They discover evidence that was improperly collected, traces that were tampered with, and important samples that were never tested. If this is a treasure hunt, the narrator chimes in, the cops just dropped the map down the hole, and now the lawyers have to dive in and find it. A climax of the chapter is the arrival of independent investigative journalists, who begin to question the legitimacy and accuracy of the investigation. They interview people, examine the scene, and compare testimony with physical evidence. The biggest revelation? Jesse is being led around during the interrogation, and Damien and Jason are completely innocent. The narrator chimes in. If you thought the press was a harmless third party, here they are, superheroes saving three teenagers from a paranoid firestorm. Meanwhile, psychologists begin to analyze Jesse. He is shy, easily pressured, and inexperienced in dealing with investigators. His initial testimony is completely unreliable according to psychological science. The narrator chimes in. If you think a child's testimony is harmless, imagine the tsunami of injustice that one word uttered in a dark interrogation room can unleash. Also in Chapter 2, we delve into the impact of public opinion and the Satanic Panic. People believe that suspects are performing rituals, and judgments are based on religious superstition. This leads to a terrible pressure on the courts, prosecutors, and lawyers. The narrator interjects. If you thought the Satanic Panic was just a movie, West Memphis proves, when panic spreads, the truth can be buried under a mountain of rumors. Chapter 2 culminates in the preliminary hearing, where Damien, Jason, and Jesse face a storm of public opinion, media, and conflicting evidence. Every little detail, from gestures, looks, to words, is exploited by the prosecutor. The narrator interjects. If you ever want to see a live drama, here it is, three young men, a court, and a maze of evidence. Who wins? Let's continue watching. At the end of the chapter, readers are left with the big question. Can the three young men survive the media storm and the courtroom based on messy evidence? And can justice really be served in a context filled with superstition, panic, and panic? The narrator interjects. If you think that justice is just a concept, West Memphis reminds you. Justice is sometimes a difficult journey, full of twists, and a little humor to lighten the gloom. Guys, if you think that all the mysteries have been revealed, then Part 3 is where the investigative mistakes, legal loopholes, and clever defense tactics appear. Don't miss West Memphis 3, Flawed Investigation, True Crime Documentary, Part 3, where every detail will make you startled and even laugh. If Chapter 2 was a media storm, Chapter 3 is when that storm turns into a legal maelstrom, where every little detail, every seemingly innocuous piece of evidence can either bring down or save three teenagers. Welcome back to West Memphis, where truth, panic, and humor are so intertwined that you don't know whether to laugh or cry. As the chapter begins, imagine a bustling law office, papers piled high, tapes of Jesse's interrogation spilling over the desk, and the lawyers taking a sip of coffee as they prepare for the big hearing. The narrator chimes in. If you think being a lawyer is just wearing a suit to court, imagine. You're analyzing confusing evidence, fighting a storm of public opinion, and keeping your client from going crazy. The point of Chapter 3 is to expose the flaws in the investigation. As we know, Jesse's testimony is crucial but extremely vague. Meanwhile, Damien and Jason have no physical evidence to back up their case. The police have relied on conflicting details, then created theories about satanic rituals, but have not thoroughly tested them. The narrator interjects. If this was a Sudoku game, the police just put the wrong number in the wrong box. And we all know the result will be a headache. One of the climactic scenes early in the chapter is when the defense begins to question Jesse. They discover that Jesse is being led on, pressured, and does not fully understand the consequences of her testimony. In court, the defense uses a strategy of analyzing every sentence, every word, every punctuation mark, and proves that Jesse is perfectly capable of telling imaginary things to please the investigator. The narrator interjects. If you told a little lie when you were 16 to get out of jail, imagine Jesse doing it. But the whole town is watching. Meanwhile, the prosecutor refuses to budge. They built maps, diagrams, and even imaginary timelines to prove that Damien, Jason, and Jesse were the culprits. But step by step, the lawyers countered with physical evidence, alibi schedules, and witnesses. The narrator chimed in. If this were a game of chess, the lawyers would have just made a back-check move, while the prosecutors thought they were moving a pawn. Not only that, forensic experts began re-examining hair, blood, and fingerprint samples. They discovered many samples that had not been analyzed or had been mishandled. This opened a big window of doubt. Were the three teenagers really involved, or were they just victims of satanic panic and media hype? The narrator chimed in. If you think forensics is just a cold science, imagine them finding clues while avoiding public opinion traps and avoiding the media drama. In Chapter 3, we also see the mundane and suspenseful. As Damien goes to school, Jason goes to work in the garden, Jesse tries to live a normal life, but every move is watched. The narrator chimes in. If you thought living a normal life was easy, imagine being 18, and your every move is being watched like paparazzi hunting a celebrity, and you're not famous. The next big thing is the public trial, where the defense attorneys present evidence of investigative flaws, pressured interrogations, missing pieces of evidence, conflicting testimony, and not even a direct witness who saw Damien or Jason commit the crime. The narrator chimes in. If you've ever played hide-and-seek, this is the horror version. The attorneys are playing hide-and-seek with the truth. The climax of this chapter is the direct confrontation in court, when the lawyer asks the prosecutor about the loopholes. Why was Jesse's testimony believed more than physical evidence? Why was the satanic ritual assumed without evidence? Why was the scene not examined thoroughly before making a conclusion? The audience almost held their breath. The narrator interjected. If you think that confrontation is just talking, then here is a tense battle of wits, where each question is like an arrow aimed at the prosecution's argument. Meanwhile, Jesse, Damien, and Jason feel like they have the opportunity to hear the truth for the first time. The lawyers skillfully use scientific evidence and psychological analysis to prove that the three boys are completely innocent. The narrator interjected. If this were a video game, Jesse, Damien, and Jason would have just picked up a power-up and be ready to continue the survival level. But the drama is not over. The media still does not miss the opportunity. They reenacted the crime scene, filming the attorneys moving, Damien slinking down the hallway, Jesse looking down. Every little detail was edited to heighten the sensationalism. The narrator chimed in, "If you think the media is neutral, West Memphis proves it. They can turn a frown into a headline." Meanwhile, independent investigators began piecing together the entire file. They found a series of inconsistencies in the evidence, even blood samples taken incorrectly, mixed up fingerprints, and Jesse's confession is coerced. The narrator interjects, "If you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, the colors are all mixed up, and you have to start over." Chapter 3 culminates in the final public trial of the period, where prosecutors, lawyers, and forensic experts go toe-to-toe. Every detail is highlighted: the timeline, the physical evidence, the psychological analysis, and the mysteries surrounding Jesse's testimony. The narrator interjects, "If you think the courtroom is all about order and rules, West Memphis is a reminder. Here, the courtroom is also the ultimate drama theater." At the end of the chapter, viewers are left with the tantalizing question: will the three teens make it out of the holes in the investigation that's riddled with satanic panic? Will justice really prevail in a town consumed by paranoia and media manipulation? The narrator interjects, "If you think the end is near, then hold on tight. Part 4 will take us into the center of the legal storm and surprising twists, where every little piece of evidence can change the fate of 3 young men." Guys, if you think all the mysteries have been revealed, then Part 4 is where the real investigation tricks, legal pressure, and unprecedented twists appear. Don't miss West Memphis 3, Flawed Investigation True Crime Documentary, Part 3, where every detail will make you startled, laugh, and shiver with each page of the file. Prepare yourself. If Chapter 3 is a legal tornado, Chapter 4 is a superstorm, where every trivial detail, every seemingly harmless piece of evidence is blown up into a climax of drama, where 3 teenagers, Jesse, Damien, and Jason, face a battle for survival before justice, public opinion, and the media. Welcome back to West Memphis, where truth and fantasy intertwine like a spicy and sweet salad, making you not know whether to breathe or scream. This chapter opens with a spectacular scene in court, where the defense attorney has prepared a series of new evidence. The narrator interjects, "If you think lawyers just stand there reading documents, here they're Sherlock Holmes, the main character in an action movie, and have to deal with the paparazzi standing outside the window." The tense atmosphere, but mixed with humorous moments, makes viewers unable to take their eyes off. Damien and Jason enter the courtroom with determined eyes, while Jessie tries to stay calm, her hands shaking as she holds the documents her lawyer has just handed her. From the very beginning, unexpected twists appear. Independent forensic experts discover many flaws in the sampling process. Some blood samples are not properly marked, fingerprints are mixed up, and even some eyewitness statements are collected without being cross-checked. The narrator interjects, "If you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, the whole picture is mismatched, and you have to start all over again, but this time with the lives of 3 teenagers." Next, the prosecutor is forced to confront the evidence against them directly. In a climactic moment, the lawyer presents a detailed diagram of the crime scene that the police initially left out, pointing out that the timeline they created completely does not match the physical evidence. The narrator interjects, "If this were a game of chess, the lawyer would have just made a back check, and the prosecutor would be sitting there frowning. Why did I lose?" Not only that, but the everyday scenes interspersed in the courtroom add to the story's vibrancy. Damien still tries to chat with his friends on the phone. Jason picks up a book from his backpack to read while waiting for the trial, and Jesse writes a diary, recording every tense moment. The narrator interjects, "If you think living a normal life is easy, imagine being 18 and having your every move watched like a Hollywood star. And you don't have a stylist." Chapter 4 also highlights the lawyers' daring legal maneuvers. They point out contradictions in their testimony, unverified evidence, and even errors in their crime scene records. Every time the lawyer asks a pointed question, the whole courtroom holds its breath, and the narrator interjects, "If you've ever challenged someone to a riddle, imagine if this question could change a person's destiny." One of the most tense moments is when the defense attorneys bring up Jesse's old testimony, in which he was led and pressured to confess. They demonstrate that many of the details Jesse tells are imposed by the police and not the truth. The narrator interjects, "If you've ever told a little lie to get out of jail, multiply it by 1,000 and add media pressure, and you'll get Jesse's feelings." The climax comes when the witnesses are called. Some change their testimony, some prove alibi, and many small details become vital clues. The narrator interjects, "If you think that testimony is just words, then imagine each sentence and each word as bricks stacked right or wrong, can build a court of justice or destroy it." This chapter also exploits the media and public opinion factor, when the press reconstructs the entire case in a sensational way, even distorting details to attract readers. The narrator interjects, "If you think that the press is neutral, West Memphis proves it. They can turn a frown into a loud headline, and the whole town will be swept up in drama." Another important point is the appearance of psychologists who analyze the behavior of the three teenagers, investigators, and even witnesses. They prove that public pressure, guided interrogation, and satanic panic have distorted the entire investigation process. The narrator chimes in, "If you've ever seen someone stressed out by a deadline, multiply that by the town, the media, the police. That's the pressure the three teenagers are under." A twist comes when a new piece of evidence is analyzed. Blood and hair from the crime scene don't match Damien or Jason, but rather someone else. This scene makes the courtroom explode. The narrator chimes in, "If you thought twists were only in movies, you're now seeing a real-life twist. New evidence. All theories are turned upside down, and you don't know what's true." At the end of the chapter, the three teenagers seem to be standing before the door of justice. All the physical evidence, testimony, psychological analysis, and media are now on the line. The narrator chimes in, "If you think if logic is a straight line, then West Memphis is a maze. Every step." If Chapter 4 was the storm, then Chapter 5 is the end of the storm, where every piece of the case, from physical evidence, witness testimony, psychological analysis, to public pressure, is put together on the scales of justice, and where the West Memphis 3 story will reach its dramatic peak, making you both nervous and unable to stop laughing at real-life situations that are worse than Hollywood action movies. Welcome back, friends, to the place where the truth is both terrifying and fascinating, and where three teenagers, Jesse, Damien, and Jason, are standing on the threshold of their destiny, preparing to face a decision that could change their lives. This chapter opens right in the courtroom, where the defense attorney, after months of document research, confronts the prosecutors who have used every trick in the book to force the three teenagers to plead guilty. The audience in the courtroom almost held their breath, and the narrator interjected, "If you think that the courtroom is just papers and lawyers reading out loud, here is like a boxing match with all the witnesses, evidence, and media pressure jumping into the ring." Damien entered the courtroom with a cold gaze. Jason bowed his head as if to tell the world, "Look at me. I am not afraid," while Jesse held the notebook as a secret weapon. Immediately, new evidence was presented, things that were ignored or analyzed poorly in the previous trial. A DNA sample that had never been verified, some physical traces that contradicted the original testimony, and psychological evidence analyzed in detail by experts. The narrator interjected, "If you ever put together a puzzle, this is the hardest part. Each piece can change the whole picture, and this picture is the lives of three teenagers." One of the first climaxes comes when the defense attorneys point out a serious flaw in the interrogation process. They demonstrate that Jesse was manipulated into telling details he did not remember. Damien was psychologically pressured into giving false testimony, and Jason was subjected to mental intimidation. The narrator interjects, "If you think of pressure as a work deadline, multiply it by the hundreds of eyes watching you every day and the whole town watching your every move. You will understand the pressure of the West Memphis Three." Then the physical evidence is analyzed in detail, reaching conclusions that have never been presented in previous trials. An independent forensic expert presents that the fingerprints at the scene do not match the three teenagers, but most likely belong to someone else, someone who has never been seriously investigated. The narrator chimes in. If you thought twists only happened in detective movies, now the twist is happening right before your eyes. Evidence that turns all the old theories upside down. The trial continues with a fierce confrontation between the lawyer and the prosecutor. The sharp questions force the prosecutor to repeat himself, and the contradictions in the file are revealed piece by piece. The narrator chimes in. If you've ever played a trivia game, this is the advanced version. Each correct question can change a person's destiny, and the lawyer here is the puzzle genius version. The tension is eased by interspersed scenes of everyday life, where the three teenagers look at each other, sharing tired but hopeful smiles. Damien sends a sneaky wink to Jason. Jessie writes a few lines in her diary to record the moment of surviving the legal storm. The narrator chimes in. If you think life in court is boring, try experiencing it as a tragicomedy. Tense but not without moments of surprise. The next highlight is the appearance of important witnesses, a neighbor, a former classmate, and a character who is overlooked. They provide key information, pointing out that many details of the case have been overinterpreted due to satanic panic, public opinion, and media pressure. The narrator chimes in. If you've ever suspected someone through social media, imagine the whole town doing it to three teenagers. And the law, too. Another big twist comes when an independent forensic expert confirms the initial signs that the police interpreted as evidence of a crime could actually have been caused by the natural environment. The narrator interjects. If you think nature is just trees in West Memphis, nature can be complicit, and the court will have to recalculate every last detail. The trial reaches its climax, where every contradiction, evidence, and testimony is brought to light. The defense attorney stands before the jury, pointing out that there is no solid physical evidence, no credible testimony, and that public pressure has led to a skewed conclusion. The narrator interjects. If you think justice is a straight path, think again. West Memphis is a maze, and three teenagers run marathons, solve Rubik's Cubes, and perform circus acts to survive. And finally, the most memorable scene is when the three teens stand and listen to the final announcements from the court, detailing the possibility of appeals, new evidence, and the next steps in their legal journey. The narrator chimes in. If you think the end is for resting, then West Memphis isn't over. This is where every next step will determine the real fate. Guys, Chapter 5 has brought us to the final climax of the current trial, but the story of the West Memphis Three is not over yet. In Part 4, Appeals and New Evidence, we will discover shocking new evidence, a bold appeal campaign, and twists that will leave the town in disbelief. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and prepare yourself for the next chapter in the quest for truth and justice in true crime documentary, where the smallest detail could change the lives of three teens.